Well, it seemed fitting today to talk about the Buddha's teaching on dependent origination, his revelations in this area, which were part of his full realization of enlightenment. It's almost like the groundwork on which the whole of Buddhism is sitting on. It's actually explains the essence of what it is we're practicing as Buddhists. So, dependent origination, let me give you a background in that first. It's also called the law of causality, and in the Buddhist canon you can find references to causality or dependent origination, sort of interchangeably. The law of causality, it's a universal vision of existence, of everything, including us. It's not just interconnectivity, it's not just things connecting. It's actually a law that says everything is dependent on certain factors. Almost we could say the biggest picture of all is everything is interdependent. The dependent origination then is saying a little bit more, I think. It's suggesting a bit more here. It's saying, yes, everything is dependent, but our origins, or the origins of everything, are dependent on the presence of factors already present. Dependent originations, or dependent arisings. And this applies to everything. It applies to all solid things, material things, abstract things, thoughts and feelings, concepts, ideas within us, wind, just everything, you know. Everything arises out of conditions already present. What's implied by that, of course, the full complete law, as it were, is that nothing arises by itself. Nothing creates itself. So, Shakyamuni Buddha did not devise this law, by the way. This has been known long before Buddhism as a philosophy. Certainly in Indian thought you can find the law of causality and various expressions about it in the Vedic tradition, and in Hinduism as well, I believe, although I don't know the details there. So we can presume that since the Buddha was well educated, he already probably had a background of this concept, the vision, if you like, of what reality is. But his special contribution was that he looked into dukkha. He looked into what we translate as suffering. And he, by a series of revelations, could trace through why suffering, or dukkha, this version of suffering, exists for absolutely everyone. He couldn't say that, I can't say that definitively, but it seems like, it looks like it does exist for everyone. And not just humans, but also, you can see it in animals too. Now, this word dukkha, let's just make something very general about this suffering. It does include all the specifics of suffering, but underneath what it's saying is it's that kind of sense in life that there's something unsatisfactory about it, that indeed we should be living to fulfill and make it satisfying, not just for ourselves but for others. There's an unease with that throughout life, I think, because we get this underlying sense of, it's incomplete in some way. It's a never at rest kind of suffering. So, can I just say before I go any further, the diagram here, the background wallpaper shows the interlinking of the law of causality. And then on what I've written on top of it is a stream of single conditions. And it's part of the Buddha's revelations on dependent origination. Actually, six elements. 1, 2. I hope you can read this at the back. Can you? All right. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sort of series, a stream of dependent arisings going on there. If those of you who are Buddhists probably will have heard of the 12 links of dependent origination, and that gives you the real full picture. This is just 5 of the steps in there. It's a bit much to get the whole whammy of the dependent origination in one go, so I've gone for the detail in the 5. Right, so now I'm going to still give you a background here of how this, the background story here. The Buddha, it said, on the night of his enlightenment, he came to that night resolved, determined. He'd done so much more before that and hadn't had a lot of success. I qualify that. I bet he'd had some. He wouldn't have kept going. He wouldn't have kept going if he hadn't found something. And certainly he knew how to meditate. So, but on that last night, he decided, this is it. Real resolve now, a huge resolve, really. I'm going to sit. I'm going to delve into dukkha. So that's what he did, and in the process there, his meditative concentration, he's focused on dukkha, gets into it, and then he traces it through to what causes dukkha. And a first step was revealed to him, and then he, acknowledged it, and then moved on to the next step. And this is where he got the dependent origination dukkha. He did it by delving one step after another. And we do talk about these as being revelations because it wasn't sitting there thinking about it and working it out. If you try to do that for yourself, your mind tends to go in all sorts of directions. This was something much more underneath. That's hard to explain, but... And then, once he'd gone through, really to birth, his own birth, the birth of everyone, and a bit further, he then came back in a forwards direction, through how dukkha arose through the steps. And again, to make sure he got it, and he got the detail more, he went backwards in again, and came forwards again. And they say he did this several times during that long, dark night. And at the end of that, he was almost content because he'd got like 90% of what he was really looking for. What causes dukkha for existence? And then, of course, he was completely calm because of having delved like that. in exquisite calmness and extraordinary clarity. And then he came to see he came to realise his own Buddha nature. And the real nature, the Buddha nature of everything. And that was the completion of that night. Because having realised what was underneath all of this, he could see that if you don't know that, you are a bit automatically involved in going through the steps of dependent origination before you know where you are into suffering. So what I'd like to do now is go to the diagram, and I expect you've been looking at it and you've probably got pretty much the idea of what it's saying. This particular diagram came from a sutra, from the Sutta Nipata in the Pali Canon. You can find this particular set of steps and the end step there, which says anger and argument. You can find that in a sutta where the Buddha's questioned about how does anger arise? How do we end up in disputes and fights? And I think Wesak is going to help me with this, because what we're going to do is enact the sutta, and I'm going to stand on the side. So, let me find my sheet, because we've both got the script to follow here. Okay.
Would the Buddha please spare a moment to answer a question?
To which the Buddha replied, I shall answer accordingly.
Why do humans and other beings express anger towards each other, argue and have fights?
Anger fundamentally arises from things held very dear. Things clung to, whether they are material things, land, possessions, etc., or ideas and theories. Quarrels can also arise about some things adamantly rejected or pushed away. If things are not clung to or pushed away, then anger would not arise.
Yes, I can see that anger would arise because of holding to something cherished, if another person threatened that in some way. But what produces such holding in us in the first place?
Desire is the one necessary condition that when present, it can give rise to chasing after and subsequently clinging to something. If desire, the chasing after, was not around, clinging would not arise.
So, I must ask, what is the condition from which desire itself arises?
So, desire or aversion, which is the pushing away part, arise from feelings. If you feel delight or pleasure in an object, it is possible that you will then desire it. Likewise, if you take a dislike to something, or if it causes discomfort or pain, you may seek to avoid it. Without those feelings as conditions, desire or aversion would not arise. Now they might exist, but these come out of those. You get the idea? Yeah, come on.
Can you tell us, please, what the condition is in us which give rise to feelings of like or dislike?
Yeah. So as you can see, the step before is this word contact. Those of you who know Buddhism will probably, be familiar with that. if it's the first time of seeing further there, it simply means how you're contacting what's out there beyond you. Your sensory perception is about that. Also your consciousness, your memory, everything that we think of as this package is contacting with the external world. And then, obviously, what causes contact? How's that come? Well, that's obvious, isn't it? It is. And then we're back into this body with our sensory perceptions. And of course, it does go on further, from the body being born. You get the idea, you can see where the 12 steps, the 12 links might be involved there. Right, so that was one sutra. Now, thank you. Can you go back to looking at these 5 steps? Because they're more general, a more general version of what's going on for all of us. I'm not into the specifics of where they lead. The Buddha pointed out, I'm sure you may be thinking this already, but you can actually cut this, can't you? You can actually cut here somewhere, so that we're not slaves to and end up out there. Would anyone like to suggest where they think the easiest cut? You need awareness, don't you? Mindfulness for this in your daily life. But where do you think would be the easiest cut? Anyone? Yeah, sure.
I'm just going to have a stab at it. It's happens, but I'm thinking non-judgment. We can catch our judgment, not judge it good or bad. Then that neutrality can arise.
Yes, indeed, that's right. Let's see. Yes, a judgment really is part of this simple pattern here. It's almost coming in with feeling in a way, isn't it? I don't know, I kind of put it kind of earthy down with the feeling myself. Could someone else perhaps suggest where, just in that simple pattern, you could actually stop and say, no, making that, make that cut, break the link. Yeah?
Between desire and attachment.
Between desire and attachment, here. Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with you. I think that's probably where you can call the shots, because once you've got to this point, you can see where it's going to go. That's the cut, isn't it? Yes, possibly here too. I think, you can stop at the feelings. I'm not sure that you can stop your feelings. We're getting into suppression, aren't we, if we go further back? It gets more and more difficult, obviously, further along you go to the left. The point being, isn't it, that if you make a cut, the rest of the stages collapse. They can't happen. That's the neat picture about this, isn't it? Which you can take away with you. That's what's going on. If you make the cut, well, especially there, perhaps, if you make that cut, that the attachment can't happen. If you're into attachments, you can still make the cut when the circumstances is turning on you. But it is actually quite hard once you've clung to something to let it go. That's again Buddhist practice, is it not? The learning to let go. Right, so that's part of what the Buddha taught about this, and it's part of the Eightfold Path. Dependent origination is right view, or at least most of right view, which is the first stage of the Eightfold Path. Right effort is about being aware enough to pay attention to this. Now, if we, again, ignore those negative outcomes there, can you also see that these are the 5 stages, the generalised ones, don't necessarily, it's not necessarily all about bad outcomes. It's actually about good outcomes as well. Has that occurred to you as you sit there and look? It's not just about bad stuff, is it? What about when you... Well, what about if you chase after a really fine job, which you know you're going to be good at, and helps everyone? You see? So, this is complicated, isn't it, once you start to look at it as a more general thing. But can I just point out to you something that, coming from my age, I can say that with conviction, if you spend your life, if that is what's happening to you on a daily basis, all of this, and then clinging, got to do that, must have that, you recognise the tendency there, so likewise cling to avoiding, get that out of the way, let me, if you spend your life doing that, by the time you're 50 or 60, you will be bored. Thank goodness life does hold more than this. I think it's very, very complicated, and the whole of causality is very complex. But just that impetus in life, you'll end up very bored, and you'll end up saying, there must be more to life than this. Heard that? Yes. So there's a lesson there. I'll just have to look at my notes a minute. Yeah. So we do have to take on the dependency. That is what I hope you can take away with this. Otherwise, what you're doing with your life, if you just keep following this without paying attention to it, I love this expression, you're just simply upgrading samsara. And there's more to life than that, isn't there? So, Reverend Ryozan, I think you've got one more question for us.
Who is it that clings?
Who is it that clings? In a couple of more suttas, you can find the Buddha is using this to explain things to people, and he's been asked, who is it that feels? And then somewhere else, who is it that makes contact? Now, this is what the Buddha replied. Not a valid question. I do not say one clings. I do not speak thus. A valid question would be, with what as condition does clinging come to be? With the presence of desire. The answer, the valid answer would be, with the presence of desire, does clinging come to be? The language is a bit, get your head around that, but not a valid question to ask who. He's pushing you, he pushes us in his teaching beyond the I and me who is suffering. And he's saying, you don't, just look at this. Just look at this and know this inside yourself. Take it in, know it for yourself. You can cut out the middleman. Because the problem with the middleman, and it's not necessarily a problem, but with this, it tends to cause a barrier. And you can't see beyond the I who is suffering. So make that direct contact, as we say in Buddhism. Make a direct contact and really look into what's going on. Okay, that's the class on dependent origination, and looking at the 12 links, the whole 12 links, it makes it all very, very clear. But that's another day.